Un.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett joins us now from Seoul, South Korea. So, Major, let's begin with the president's comments on North Korea. He said he sees certain movement on diplomatic efforts, but he didn't elaborate further. What should we take away from that?
That the president is really trying to soften a very tense situation, diffuse it if he can, at least while he is here in South Korea. The sense of menace, the fear of war is more pronounced here than at any time in the 3 previous visits I've made with American presidents to South Korea. It is the dominant topic, not just here, but throughout the region. What is going to be the outcome of this collision course? The United States, a global superpower with a vast array of nuclear weapons and a very strong conventional military force, will have with North Korea over this issue of the future of its nuclear and ballistic missiles program. And the South Korean, led by Moon Jae-in, the newly elected president, just in office since May, ran on a platform of trying to reach out to the North and to try to find a way to create lines of communication that might lead to a diplomatic resolution of this long-standing issue. And so the president and Moon Jae-in, the president here, have not been on the same page. Yes, they both say the same language about denuclearization of North Korea, but they have very different methods of approaching that. And it's very clear the president, while here, wants to soft pedal, because you can't erase, but certainly soft pedal the very fiery, remember, fire and fury rhetoric of the summer that got all of America and much of this region agitated, and suggest that he is open, at least conceptually, to some form of direct negotiations with North Korea. There is a great deal of distance to go before any of those talks could even begin, let alone become productive. But while here, the president does not want to make this agitated place and region more so.
Yeah, you know, I think, Major, all along there's been questions about just what exactly is the plan in regards to North Korea, because it seemed like some members of the president's cabinet spoke differently than he did. And then when he spoke earlier, he talked about, it being sort of no choice but to have North Korea come to the table. And it sounded to me like we were getting a little window into what the actual plan is. It appears to be to put so much pressure on North Korea that they have to want to open a dialogue.
Yes, to use a phrase that the president would be comfortable with, make North Korea say uncle. Make
Right.
North Korea say we can't stand it anymore. The economic pressure is so intense. The diplomatic isolation has become so pronounced. We are literally all by ourselves, and our client state to the north, China, is no longer looking out for our interests either diplomatically or economically, and we have to give in. The other component of that is that North Korea is relentlessly fearful of U.S. military invasion in pursuit of regime change. And so while the president is here with much softer rhetoric, the North Koreans, I guarantee you, are obsessed with the fact that there are 3 U.S. aircraft carrier groups in the region, a larger concentration of that naval power than has been here for a very long time. I'm not sure the length of time. David Martin would know, but it's been a very, very long time. Certainly there's never been that concentrated U.S. naval power during the reign of Kim Jong-un. And there's also, just in case the North was curious, a nuclear submarine operated by the United States also in the region. So those are the kind of signals the North Koreans take much more seriously and weigh much more carefully than the rhetoric that comes from any U.S. administration. And so I guarantee you the North's eyes are on the military component of the equation in the region, as well as the president's rhetoric. So on the one hand, the president's saying, hey, there's an option here, maybe direct talks or something you might be interested in, but keep in mind, our military might is right at your front door.
And so, Major, the president will have the opportunity to drive home that message with a speech tonight that will be broadcast here in the United States, which will obviously be tomorrow there in South Korea. Do we expect the language of diplomacy or more tough talk?
It's going to be a combination of the two. I think what the president wants to do is give a speech that's not only resonant for a good long while here in South Korea, but one that the Japanese, he just left Tokyo with his good friend, the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and who he's going to see next on this Asia tour, President Xi in China, all can hear and all can take something away from. For the South Koreans, war is not the first option. For the Japanese, we are going to maintain regional security and we're not going to let North Korea off the hook. To the Chinese, you have got to do what an emerging superpower must do in situations like this. China, if you want to be a world leader, as President Xi said at the 16th Party Congress that just concluded, making him the most powerful leader in China since Deng Xiaoping, if you want to be that preeminent world leader or on par with the United States, then you've got to act like a serious global power and help us defuse this situation by taking a reckless regime, its nuclear weapons, and its emerging ballistic missile program and wipe it off the table if you can. I think those are the three messages and the three audiences for this president's address.
All right, before we let you go, Major, the president also waded into the domestic issue of gun control in the wake of Sunday's shooting in Texas. He was asked by a reporter whether or not people should undergo extreme vetting before buying a gun. Let's listen to his response and we'll talk about it.
You might not have had that very brave person who happened to have a gun or a rifle in his truck go out and shoot him and hit him and neutralize him. And I can only say this, if he didn't have a gun, instead of having 26 dead, he would have had hundreds more dead.
All right, so, what do you make of his response? We don't know exactly what the reporter meant by extreme vetting, but we know now that the gunman in this case, that the basic vetting failed because he really should not have legally been able to purchase a gun. And we also don't know anything about the Good Samaritan who came forward and stopped this, whether or not extreme vetting would have prohibited him from having a gun, presuming he's got a great background and could legally purchase a gun. But I'll let you unpack that.
Well, there's a pattern emerging with this president dealing with mass shootings, and the pattern is this. Focus on either heroism after the fact, intervention by first responders, police, and others, and ignore any of the underlying facts that led up to the mass shooting. The acquisition of the weapon, the mental health scenario, whether those weapons contribute to a mentality for someone who is deranged to take out a much more willful and murderous act of aggression. That just simply does not factor into this president's calculus about what happened and why. He focuses entirely on the event after it ended. He did that in Las Vegas, and he's done so now in Sutherland Springs, Texas, leaving aside and acting as if it's almost irrelevant the question about the lethality of these particular weapons in the hands of people who, in this case, for sure, should not have been able to acquire one, and in general, whether military-style weapons in the hands of those who are mentally ill create an even greater threat of danger to Americans in larger numbers than we've ever experienced or imagined before. It's simply not a conversation the president's interested in, and I contrast that with the New York terrorist attack last week, in which the president got immediately obsessed and very granular in his detailed understanding or semi-understanding of the immigration program behind it, how many family members the alleged assailant brought in with him after obtaining a green card in the United States, and then immediately questioning all the underlying legislation behind that. I mean, you contrast the two situations. One, this president leaps on all potentially negative fact patterns before the event, the terrorist attack in New York, but in these U.S. mass shootings does not. Focuses entirely on what happened after the shooting began and who intervened and why and what they stopped from becoming worse than it was, as if the carnage in Las Vegas and Sutherland Springs, Texas wasn't bad enough. And the president doesn't suggest it's not bad, but his pattern, and one that is becoming clearer and clearer, is to focus entirely on the after the fact and not anything that preceded it.
Yeah, it's so true. Not to mention talking about it's too soon to sort of have this conversation, and yet determining that mental health was a factor before we knew anything about the gunman at all.
Right. We have no idea what his mental health condition was.
Right.
And as you point out, Major, the president, a lot of people have pointed out there have been a number of these contrasts, even in Las Vegas, when the president then, very similarly to what happened earlier this weekend, very similar reaction from the president. But when it came to the terrorist attacks in New York, it was all about the politics. It was all about the legislation on the books. So there are a lot of theories as to why the president decides to comment in the way that he does in the wake of these horrific attacks, Major.
Major Garrett in Seoul, South Korea.